Welcome to Olmsted Overheard, the place for real conversations about what's happening in and around Olmsted Falls, and in this case, Olmsted Township, Ohio. I'm your host, Mark McCausland. If you have been keeping an eye on the Olmsted Falls and Olmsted Township Facebook pages, you've probably seen the conversations lately about Flock, the camera systems that Olmsted Township is looking to install. Worth noting, Olmsted Falls already has them. Now the township is weighing whether to follow. And like a lot of issues these days, it's gotten polarizing fast. So I want to be clear up front about what this episode is and what it isn't. My goal here is not to tell you to be for or against Flock. It's to give you context, the kind that is hard to fit into a string of Facebook comments. So hopefully you can use this to better inform yourself and decide where you stand. My guest today is Nate French, an Olmsted Township resident who has been doing a lot of homework. Nate has been researching these systems, citing his sources, and sharing what he finds. He will be the first to tell you that he does have concerns about Flock, but I invited him because the information he brings is worth hearing, no matter which side of the fence you end up landing on. This is part one of a two-part deep dive. Today we'll cover what Flock actually is, how the technology works, the case for it, and the risks and trade-offs that come with it. In part two, we will bring it home and dig into the local picture in Olmsted Township. Let's get into it. This is Olmsted Overheard. I want to first say welcome to Nate French. If you pay attention to the Olmsted Falls and Township Facebook pages, you've probably seen some conversations recently about how the township is in the midst of seeking out the Flock camera systems to be installed in Olmsted Township. And you may have seen Nate posting on there as well, because Nate has a lot of information that he's trying to share with the community about Flock. I invited Nate to have a conversation with me on the podcast here to provide a lot more information than is feasible in a string of Facebook posts. So Nate, would you mind giving a quick introduction to yourself?
Hey, Mark, and thank you for having me on. Yeah, definitely excited to get this information out there in more of a long-term setting. Facebook posts can be challenging to get enough information out with the right amount of context to have the voice of the community be heard. A little bit about me: recently moved into Olmsted Township last year with my wife, and we both work locally. I work in analytics for medical software development, and we've been very happy here. We love learning more about the community, and in that I've wanted to put my voice out there a little bit more in the community as well, to meet new people and understand how we all work together and live together. And this all came up just from natural curiosity and my background in data. So yeah, happy to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you here. I do want to get something out of the way, and it's that my intent for this episode is not to sway anybody one way or the other on whether or not you like Flock. I don't think it's controversial to say that Flock has become controversial. It's polarizing. People have very strong opinions one way or the other. Flock as a company has made several headlines in the national news in the last probably year and a half or so. And again, my purpose here is not to sway somebody one way or the other. If you have seen the posts on Facebook, you probably know that Nate is not a fan of Flock. But I invited Nate because anytime he's posting on there, he's giving information, he's citing his sources, he's providing this sort of background, and he's doing all this research. And I think that information is valuable no matter what side of the fence you end up being on. Nate, did you have anything else you want to say about all of that?
No, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I try and be as level-headed and fair as possible. I'm always open to both sides of that conversation, and I try to make that known in the comment section from the posts that I've made. So I think the main thing is to get people talking about it. A lot of people are just sort of unaware of what these systems are and what they're capable of. It's one thing to hear the marketing from the actual company selling the product, and another thing to see how it's used in reality. So yeah, definitely just trying to get as much fair, unbiased information as we can out there so people know about it.
Sounds good. Let's dive in then. I think it's worth starting with what is Flock. Let's give some background here. What is Flock? How does it work? What's the technology? What's the company? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Flock in itself is a software company. They have made and recent years, their most popular product is an ALPR system, so an automated license plate reader system. And most people think of it as, a couple of cameras they see here and there. But that picture kind of changes when you understand what that system means on scale. So effectively, these ALPR cameras are license plate readers. These fixed cameras, they'll photograph any passing vehicle and log that license plate, plus what they call the vehicle fingerprint. So this means the make, color, model, type of car, if there's dents, if there's bumper stickers, if there's a particular roof rack. And it saves this as an image of, where this car is going, timestamp, all that kind of information. So yes, they do read license plates, but they read context around that.
And technically speaking, is this a video feed, or is it snapping pictures just frequently?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It can be both. So there's multiple versions of these cameras now. The most common one is called Flock Falcon. Falcon cameras are the ALPRs. Those are capturing still images. There's another one, the Flock, I'm going to butcher the name. There's another version of this, which Olmsted Township in their contract has signed off on one of these cameras. That is a live feed camera, and that
video feed
is a video recording. And these cameras are getting much more advanced. They're being plugged into other softwares. I'm sure some of these listeners have heard of Palantir. Flock is very careful to say they don't have facial recognition in these license plate reader cameras, but they also just so happen to partner with products like that Gotham platform, as it's called, from Palantir, that uses facial recognition. So while these cameras don't inherently have it built in, that capability is definitely there, and it's being used by, agencies across the country. So when these plates are read and stored, that makes them searchable from thousands of jurisdictions simultaneously. So in local context, if a camera in Olmsted Falls takes a photo of your car, that can be queried and found by any agency around the country. That is the scale of this network. And the newer layer on top of that, it shows that it can link a license plate to a person through these commercial data broker connections. So it's much more than, just finding a car for a vehicle theft or something like that. And to put that scale into context here, we're looking recently, Flock had come out and said they're doing about 20 billion scans per month. So that's over 100,000 cameras and over, 5,000 communities, I think now, and at 49 states, all but one state. So this is not a niche product anymore. So this connection into this larger system is what I like to call attention to. And it's not just about finding a license plate at this point. It's finding much more than that.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the data element here. My professional background is in data and databases. I work for a consulting firm that implements database products to different customers. And so I have an eye into that. And I know that you also work in data analytics, but I don't think your average person, spends their days looking through spreadsheets or data models on a regular basis. So when you talk about how Flock is not just capturing a license plate, and they're not even just capturing the make, model, and color of a vehicle, what are the other components that a Flock camera is capturing? And therefore, this then becomes a data point or data element.
Yeah, so it's the tricky thing is the ALPR, it's licensed at, it's only looking at your license plate. Well, the whole field of view is being captured. So your car is
it's a photo.
Anything in that car is being captured. Exactly.
You can see what direction the car is going.
Your environment. Right. So when you make anything in that image a data point and searchable, any software that's plugged in or connected to that system can read any other aspect of that image. So, as mentioned, the Flock Nova platform, they have a partnership with the Gotham platform from Palantir, which can now read the facial recognition information in that image. There's other things that they have for pattern recognition in terms of if you're constantly going one direction at a certain time of day, that can create a heat map and a behavior map, so to speak, to say, hey, this person's going here every single day at 9 a.m. They can log where your doctor is, where your house is, where your work is. All these kinds of things are data points beyond what is in the image of a license plate. It's not just a bunch of letters.
And the image itself is captured because it is a camera, right? And so therefore that image, if shared via agency requests or via the data being sold or whatever, somebody else can take that image and run it through a different software that's doing more than just looking at the license plate and the make model of the car.
100%. And it logs any changes to that as well. So if you put a new bumper sticker on your car, or if you change your license plate and it recognizes it's the same car, there are many patterns here that it'll log.
I think that covers the basics of the technology here, but is there more about the technology that we should talk about?
Yeah, let's get into what this technology can do and what it means for the people that are, in these images. I do want to, I'll start with the pro case for Flock in this case.
Why do people like Flock?
Exactly. They didn't get here without any support, that's for sure. So I think it's important. There are some real use cases for this. And, as Flock has come out and marketed, these use cases can be efficiency, making policing and the finding of criminals faster in some cases. They've come out with something called, silver alerts for missing senior or child to be located faster. There's other instances where, yes, this system of connection can definitely help, carjackings and lost vehicles, stuff like that.
And on that note, I just want to also bring up that Olmsted Falls does have Flock cameras installed. I want to say 4 cameras in Olmsted Falls. The driving issue for your research and activity recently to get information out about this is because Olmsted Township is looking to install Flock. And I'm bringing this up because before I even really recognized the name Flock, I remember seeing articles about, Olmsted Falls was able to assist in XYZ situation because of a camera. And I just Googled this now just to get a specific example. So this is from October of 2025. Police in Olmsted Falls received a Flock camera notification for a wanted person driving north on Columbia Road from Sprague. So they were able to stop this vehicle near the speedway here at Columbia and Bagley. The wanted person was arrested on a felony warrant and charged with weapons and drug offenses, and police said that arrests like this are exactly one of the reasons why former Mayor Graven and the police department installed Flock cameras in 2023. This is one example of any number of hypotheticals on how they're used well. So let's talk about when they're used well and how that all works. So like what would happen day in the life for this to play out?
Yeah. So in the sense that, a car is reported stolen, one of the big pros of the system and the scale that it has is, when it's used well, that network can be connected to look for that make, model, car, license plate, etc. in a given area, even on a state or national level in the case of, a car that's going across state lines. When we have access to all of those systems and all those areas, it's like having an eye on every corner. You can find a car, figure out the direction that it's going, look at the next camera in that direction, so on and so forth to help track down that vehicle. That's where efficiency is definitely a pro towards these cameras.
Here's something that I've seen a lot of people say on Facebook. If they're helpful, even sometimes, what's the harm? If you're not doing anything wrong, why would you mind if the cameras are there and they're helping in situations like this?
Right. Yeah. The whole, if you're not doing anything wrong, why are you hiding, essentially?
Right. Yeah. That mentality. I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah. And I hate to answer a question with a question, but, does that warrant everyone being watched at all times? Does that negate your right to privacy? Does that negate your right to freedom of doing something without always being monitored by anybody, an agency, a governing body, another person who's watching a camera? So I'm not convinced that gives people the right to strip us of our privacy and our freedom. To some people, I'm sure, they feel differently. I agree these systems absolutely can help. But I also feel like if you're only looking at the option of one pro, you're ignoring the option for dozens of cons. But I do want to call out the difference in efficiency versus effectiveness. There's a difference between making a camera that helps police move faster and actually making a community safer. And I think that's where we get into a different kind of understanding of what this system can do. Because independent research has really shown these systems don't reduce crime. Now, yes, Flock is, funny enough, paid for their own research to research this topic, and they found, I think, like a 9% improvement in crime clearance rates. Independent research has not been able to find any numbers remotely close to that. They're seeing if cameras are up, the same amount of crime happens. So in some cases, yes, for carjackings, you can find the vehicle just because you're looking for a vehicle. In other cases, it's not helping out because the cameras aren't perfect. They have instances of misreads or glitches, and data is data, and you're image is only as good as the data that's within it. So it's not always helping. It's actually hurting when there's a police judgment to be made and a human judgment to be made in that area. And if an automated system is presenting something as fact and it's wrong, how do we as people make that distinction? How do we understand that it's not fact, it's just another data point to be used? Like in Toledo, earlier this year, there's the case where a guy was pulled over at gunpoint with a canine unit, and just for, he was driving his truck, he was pulled over, pulled out, and attacked by the canine unit, imprisoned. And it was found out later that Flock tagged his license plate as having an active warrant, which it didn't, because it misread the license plate. And after the guy had lost his job, he had to give up his dog for adoption because of the trauma caused by the attack by the canine unit. The police department eventually ended up settling. Taxpayers had to pay, I think, over $35,000 for that case. And he did nothing wrong. It was just a misread license plate. But when it's treated like fact from the police officers, and you're trusting all of this data to say, yes, this person has a warrant for their arrest, they did X, Y, Z, and there's no human judgment there. And I think we're taking the human out of policing, and I think that's a very dangerous road to go down, especially when the error rates on these have not been released by Flock. Flock refuses to send out how often their cameras are wrong. Independent research has put it as close to 9 or 10%. And when you think about 20 billion scans a month nationwide, even 1% is a massive issue. Yeah. You could be pulled over tomorrow for something you never did, and the police are saying you did because Flock told them so. But Flock is very quick to say that, yes, these reduce crime. These are great for helping find people, find cars. But yeah, they're not always correct.
And I do also want to bring up, I'm sitting here with my other screen up and I'm Googling a couple things as we're talking. Just from 4 days ago, there was an article that several police officers were arrested because they used the Flock license plate reader system in their community to stalk romantic partners. And investigators have unearthed at least 18 such cases in the U.S. over recent years. Now, of course, there's probably arguments to be made that, well, yeah, you're going to have bad actors no matter what. Of course you are. Again, that's why we have laws, rules, security is to try and prevent bad actors. But now we not only have, some system out here to allow for faster finding of criminals, but in the wrong hands, people with access to that information could also use it to more quickly find regular citizens for nefarious purposes.
Absolutely. And to that point, I want to call out, because that touches on something that I feel a lot of areas where Flock has come out and said, hey, we have safeguards. In order to have access to a camera, you need to have a legitimate reason. You have to put in a case number or have probable cause for searching for a vehicle or person, et cetera, et cetera. And what you just mentioned there, exactly it. That's pointing out, obviously, these police officers did not have the right to search for that person or where that person's going, time of day. So these safeguards that Flock is saying are protecting our privacy and our data, they don't work. If you're searching for an incorrect case number, or you're searching for a person who has no right to be searched for, there's no checks and balances there. There's no authentication to make sure that these systems are actually working as they should. And yeah, of course you're gonna have bad actors, but the system is only as safe as it's designed to be. So without proper safeguards, these systems can be misused as much as they want to. And without an internal audit system to catch that, it's only through these police officers, in this case, being reported, that they're caught. And that's a very dangerous game to play when everyone is being watched all the time.
So you mentioned something that I want to perhaps dive into a little bit. Without an internal audit to protect or check and balance against misuse. So what's an internal audit, and what's another example of how these are used to protect against things going poorly or things being misused? I'm going to throw out HIPAA. This is the regulations that are in place so that your medical information is kept confidential. I guarantee you, every hospital has an internal audit set up and conducted at least annually, if not more frequently than that, to do a review of a statistically significant number of documents and cases and et cetera, to make sure that that medical information was kept confidential. So do you have any more insight even into that? Like just using this as an example of what an internal audit is and what it's there for. And then I want to ask a question. Does Flock allow for internal audit? Do police departments use their own internal audits for the Flock data and the gap that might be there?
Yeah. So for medical software and data, it's auditing is huge. Having security controls in place is integral to making sure that our systems run correctly and that, you're not having, in our case, it's hospital systems, cross-client contamination where one hospital seeing another hospital's data. When you're having, nationwide databases, these things are incredibly powerful when used correctly, but you have to make sure they're set up correctly to be used correctly. So in our case, we have SOC controls or security operations centers. And for medical, there's different kinds of it. So you have the medical side for their controls, that we have our data side. So for us, we have SOC 2 compliance is what it's called, making sure that there's, threat monitoring detection, incident report protocols, third-party risk management, if anything else is plugged into that system, and making sure we're constantly in compliance with, HIPAA, a load of other agency rules that I won't get into here. But there's so many controls in place that to use the system incorrectly is incredibly difficult.
Right.
With Flock, it's almost the exact opposite. It feels like it feels like these institutions are getting, and organizations and police officers are getting access to an incredibly powerful system that works really well, but it's not designed to keep you in compliance. It's intuitive to the point where it's easy to break the rules. And without those internal controls and those internal audit red flags and warning systems, these issues are going to continue to happen. People are going to be using the system for what it's made to do, whether that's good or bad. And a lot of these instances where the articles that you just quoted, where these 18 police officers and counting are using the system in a way that it shouldn't be used. A lot of those are coming from outside reports. So victims coming in and saying that they're being tracked. That's the issue, is that, yes, these criminals are being criminally charged. These police officers using this system incorrectly are being charged as they should, but it's coming from the wrong source. So these should be flagged by Flock. They should have never had the opportunity to have that kind of action take place. It's for us to be finding it after the fact by victims. That is a very, very wrong way of doing something. You're reporting a breach from the outside, only knowing because you've been breached, is not doing anything to stop the next breach from happening.
Right. And what I think we're getting at here is that this is a huge gap currently with Flock, is that there is not prevention for misuse.
Yeah. And beyond that, there's, I think I reported on 51 documented security vulnerabilities. 22 of those have formal common vulnerabilities and exposure identifiers. I mean, it's like rudimentary security parameters that are not being followed and met. I mean, there's instances where Flock credentials have been sold on, Russian crime cyber forums and stuff like that in the dark web. And in one case, the DEA reportedly actually used a stolen password. They're for systems that are holding every resident's movement. These data systems and these databases and these models and this combined system as a whole is a target. So if you're not secure, you're opening up the entire nation to just a treasure trove of options for bad actors.
All right. I have another thing that I think I just saw this yesterday. It was on one of the Facebook conversations within the Olmsted groups, but a citizen from Shaker Heights chimed in. She was sharing that in Shaker Heights, she's submitted a request in accordance with Ohio Revised Code for the following records: Flock organization audits, Flock network audits, documenting the use of the license plate reader data conducted by entities outside of the city of Shaker Heights for a certain period of time. And what they found was that outside agencies, so non-Shaker Heights agencies, had searched their city's license plate data 273 times in 3 months. Wow. So almost 300 times in 3 months, non-Shaker Heights related agencies were using that data.
That is, especially a lot of local and state laws prohibit outside agency access into these cameras. So I know Olmsted Township, I believe we would not allow that. And there's many, many instances like the one you just mentioned where even though the city and state have put in those safeguards into their system, Flock is still allowing and granting access to outside agencies. There's a story that I love to bring attention to in Mountain View, California. The city installed their cameras, and then it turns out that against the wishes of the city, federal agencies like the ATF, the Air Force, they ran over 600,000 searches on that data. So 250 agencies had access to this data against the wishes of the state. They ended up canceling the contract, and they found out about this, but they'd already paid over $150,000 for that contract. And it's sad to see, all this taxpayer money going to something that even when you do follow the rules and you put your safeguards in place, that Flock is not adhering to them.
So I think that leads into, and we've touched on this in a lot of ways, of the question, what are these systems actually doing beyond what they're marketed for?
Yeah, so I can touch on a few. We did touch on most of the ones that I wanted to get to. So the documented security issues, there's instances of live feed cameras being just shown on the open web without any security of, children's playgrounds and dog parks and schools. And anybody has access to those. There was an article that came out last week of these live feed cameras being posted on a basic website with a URL that was mistyped and no security to protect it. And as a security company, you think their foundation would be in making things protected and safe. And they're not even doing that with their own systems, let alone yours and our data. So that's a massive, massive oversight when even if they're doing everything they promised and catching criminals, they're exposing us way more than we need to be. And for us to be paying for that is, in my eyes, ridiculous. There's also instances, there's a Texas case where the nationwide network was used for a non-criminal investigation, and they accessed 83,000 cameras for one investigation. It was used incorrectly, and that is now, I think, an active federal congressional inquiry into that instance. In Dayton, Ohio, they're covering their cameras now with trash bags. They try to cancel their contract, and the cameras are still live. So the city has gone so far as to just cover them up. So their citizens aren't being impacted by this anymore. I mean, I post on the forum today of instances where even though the city has canceled their contract and they've taken down the cameras, Flock has reinstalled them. They've put them back up and they're still using their data. And if you just turn off the access to the camera, Flock turns it back on and they're still recording all of that information. And mind you, it's all of the Flock marketing materials have pressed on the customer owns the data. You as the city, you own the data. As of February, I think 16th of this year, they took that language out of their terms and conditions.
Oh,
They've
really?
instead, they no longer have that language in there, but they still market it. And Flock now has in their verbiage is they have a perpetual and unlimited worldwide royalty-free access to your data at all times. That goes beyond the actual contract. So as long as the camera is there, they have access to anything that camera can see.
It strikes me as similar to how if you post a picture on Facebook, Facebook owns that picture forever.
Correct.
Yeah. You chose to post it, and so therefore Facebook owns it. And even if you take that picture down, hypothetically speaking, Facebook still has the rights to do whatever they want with that picture because it was posted. And in this case, the camera is allowed to have, what did you say, royalty-free?
Unlimited, perpetual access.
When we were talking about the agenda for today, you mentioned you had 7 points that you wanted to make sure you covered regarding risks or trade-offs of using this technology. I'm sure we've covered some of those already, but I wanted to give you a chance to go through those and make sure you covered off on the points you wanted to make.
Yeah, so the trade-offs that I think to go over, if we're harping on double points here, that's totally fine because I think they are very important. Trade-offs that people don't really fully think through is that these cameras track everyone, not just suspects, not just, people that have done something wrong. Every resident that drives past or walk past is now in this database, and there's nothing they can really do about it. And that's regardless of if they've done anything wrong or not. So my issue number one, my risk number one is the mass recording of the innocent. Every resident's daily movements are logs by default. It's not a targeted surveillance. It's searchable record of everyone at all times. And a lot of these now are being upgraded with audio recording as well. So they can now see you and hear you in that given area all the time. There's pan, tilt, zoom, PTZ cameras. So they can not only have video and audio, but they can be remotely controlled by any operator. So yeah, it's not just pointing in a direction, looking at a street. A lot of these are pointed at playgrounds, community centers, dog parks. Their capabilities are also constantly expanding. It was brought up at the last trustee meeting in Olmsted Township, where a resident asked, okay, these things record license plates now, but with a software update, without our knowledge, can they be recording, sound, and can they be recording video? And effectively, the police department representative that was there said, yeah, there's really no limit to the updates that can happen to these things, and the community doesn't really have a right to know about it when these happen. So, I mean, that's the issue that I have at number one with these risks.
Okay, yeah, all right, go on to risk number two.
Risk number two, that we did touch on this a little bit, for who is accessing these cameras. When it comes to local law enforcement putting in rules and regulations for how their data is going to be handled by Flock, we're seeing those aren't being adhered to. And Flock is a commercial entity. They're for profit, and they have come out and they've said, we are handled with, we contract with commercial data brokers. We partner with other institutions that we can then sell your data to. They say, hey, we're not going to sell your data. But then they also, in that same contract, say, we own all of your data. We can do whatever we want with it to make our systems better. And if making their system better means partnering with another agency or another, commercial data broker, they are within their right to do that. And that is being done. Unfortunately, we're seeing access is not limited to the control of the institution paying for it. It's controlled by Flock. So they're turning cameras back on. They're using data that they have really no right to be using, but their contract says they own it, and they have perpetual ownership of that. Risk number three, my third layer to this proverbial onion, is the misuse of the people that have access to it. So even if you're granted access and it's rightful access, there's a lack of control within the system to prevent people from misusing this system. So like you talked about earlier, 18 officers and counting have now faced criminal charges for misusing these systems to stalk ex-partners. And mind you, that's with the internal system saying you have to have a valid reason for searching for or using a camera, whether that be a case number or a criminal reason. It's proven to not work. It's proven to not be true. We're seeing evidence of that, and really no change on the Flock part. So the misuse by people running it is the third layer. And the fourth one being, when it is wrong, it's very, very dangerous. Like we touched on earlier with the man from Ohio, Toledo, that had the canine attack because the 7 on his license plate was misread as a 2. And an easy issue like that changed his life forever. He went to jail, had an attack, lost his job because of this system. So when it's wrong, it's very dangerous. That's my risk number 4. Number 5 would be security issues. So like, again, we touched on earlier, 51 documented security vulnerabilities from a security company. I mean, I don't know what other way to say it, but you'd think they'd be good at the thing that they're marketing, right? It's a safety and security. They're failing all the time, whether that be credentials on the dark web or using stolen passwords, agencies using invalid credentials. There's a lack of MFA, so multi-factor authentication, which is a very, very standard practice in terms of data security. It means when you type in a password, that's not the only thing authenticating you to ownership of that account and those credentials and security credentials that go along with it. So there's, one-time password things, there's facial recognition things, there's all of these areas with authenticating the user being the proper person to have that account are not being used.
All right, bullet point number, what are we at?
Yeah, risk number 6 on the direction that it's heading. So like I mentioned earlier, that the Texas case where over 80,000 cameras were used to track down a person that was not committing a crime, mind you, it was a non-criminal investigation, and just turning on this entire nation of surveillance for somebody that had no right to be tracked that way. Where it's heading is this surveillance state, so to speak, where everybody can be found all the time, whether or not they've done something wrong. It's this mass surveilling of the innocent, and on every street corner, it's not reducing the crime that it's said to. And sure, finding a car can be quicker in some cases. Yes, absolutely. There's the oddball case where someone can be found because they walked past a camera and they were reported missing. That's awesome. Nothing against that. But where this network of surveillance is heading is far beyond that of just making a criminal investigation a little bit faster. Good police work should not be replaced with mass surveillance. I don't think that is the trade-off we should be making. And finally, to wrap it all up, my final point for the layer number 7 is we're seeing that communities are reversing their course. So I think so far in counting, 30 or 40 cities have canceled their flock contract in the last year. And these conversations and reversals are happening locally too. I'm sure you've heard of Cleveland considering canceling their flock contract, where we have Olmsted Township in the midst of this debate and even starting a flock contract. It's interesting that the people and the organizations that have seen the same evidence that we have canceled their contract, and they're walking it back. They've seen the damage that can be done by these systems. They've seen the cost financially and otherwise that these systems bring about to their communities, and they have made that decision to end the contracts. This access to our personal information on an everyday basis that we didn't consent to, we didn't vote on, is mind-boggling. And I think that's it shouldn't be up to the citizens that are being impacted by this to stop it. It should be a conversation to be had before they even get put in the ground. And when we view these conversations in that context of how it's being used and the documented misuses and the issues that are surrounding the installation and the cover-ups, I feel like if a lot of people had the choice, they wouldn't want these systems put in place. So for us to be left out of that conversation entirely is very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is really what it's going to come down to is the question of, do you, citizen A, citizen B, trust a company to have unlimited perpetual access to camera footage of citizens in your town just going about their daily lives? And, everybody's going to have to answer that for themselves. And I'm sure people will have lots of different reasons one way or the other, but that's what it comes down to. All right, we're going to start wrapping up here. Reminder, this is part 1 of a 2-part deep dive on flock. And the reason we're breaking this up into 2 parts is, I don't like to have episodes that are longer than 45 minutes to an hour. And there's a lot to dive into here, right? So we wanted to focus this one on what is flock, how does the technology work, and then what are the pros of flock, why do people think it's a good idea, but then what are the downsides or the risks or the trade-offs that I think it's fair to say that we're trying to draw more attention to here. All right. Anything else you want to say here, Nate?
I'm excited to dig into the next part of this and the local impact that it's had. So yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
That's going to do it for part 1 of our deep dive on flock. A big thank you to Nate French for bringing so much research and care to this conversation. In part 2, we will turn to the local picture specifically for Olmsted Township. Nate will walk us through the timeline of the relationship between flock and the township dating back to 2021. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you listen, or follow along on the Olmsted Overheard YouTube channel and Facebook page so you don't miss it. And as always, if this is the kind of local coverage you want more of, share it with a neighbor. The more people who are informed, the better these conversations get. If you have thoughts, questions, or a topic you want me to dig into, or if you want to help me with the production of this podcast, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. For now, I'm Mark McCausland, and this has been Olmsted Overheard.